Have you ever sent an email that seemed perfectly clear to you, only to find out later that the other person took it a completely different way? Maybe you asked someone to take care of it when you get a chance, and they thought that meant next week, while you expected to be done before lunch. Suddenly, a project is delayed. Everyone's frustrated, and you're left wondering, how did we get here? The interesting thing is, most communication breakdowns don't happen because people aren't talking. They happen because people believe they're communicating effectively, when in reality, the message being received is completely different from the one they intended to send. Welcome to the podcast. I'm James Bradden, and today we're talking about something every one of us does every single day: communicate. Whether you're leading a team, working with coworkers, or just trying to have better conversations at home, communication shapes every relationship we have. Joining me today is someone who has spent years studying leadership, organizational behavior, and workplace communication. I'm excited to welcome Dr. Chanel Bradden. Dr. Bradden, thank you for taking the time to join us today. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your studies, and the importance of effective communication within the workplace?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I'm an organizational leadership researcher and also a workplace consultant. And my research focused on psychological safety during workplace conflict, especially the lived experiences of Black women in legal support roles. But more broadly, my work examines how leadership behaviors, communication, conflict, and organizational culture influence whether people feel safe enough to speak up, to ask questions, to admit mistakes, and also to contribute their ideas. And one thing I've learned through both my research and my consulting is that communication is at the center of almost everything we experience in the workplace. When communication is healthy, then trust grows, collaboration will improve, and people start performing at their best. But when communication breaks down, that's often where misunderstandings, disengagement, conflict, and even turnover start. So today, I hope we can help people think about communication not simply as talking, but as one of the most powerful leadership tools that we have.
I think a lot of people assume communication is just about talking or getting your point across, but there's so much more to it than that. And when I think about the way we use technology today in the workplace with Teams and Jabber and Zoom and things like that, that just offers different avenues of communication that leaders have, in their toolkits to use.
Mhm. Absolutely. Communication isn't just what we say, it's what the other person understands. So you can have the best intentions in the world, but if your message isn't received the way you intended, then communication really hasn't happened. And that's whether you're in person, you're on Teams or Zoom or Skype or any other technology that you're using. But I often tell leaders that communication is less about transmitting information and more about creating a shared understanding. And that's a very different mindset.
I agree. I agree. I think when people hear the phrase effective communication, they immediately think about speaking well or giving a great presentation. But from everything I've read and experienced, it actually starts with listening. What are your thoughts about that?
I could not agree more. One of the biggest mistakes that people make is believing that listening is simply waiting for their turn to speak. Because real listening is trying to understand before you're trying to solve or respond or defend. And I think many leaders feel pressure to have answers immediately, but employees often aren't looking for an instant solution. Sometimes we're just looking to be heard first. And I think once people feel heard, they're much more open to discussing solutions together.
Agreed, agreed. I have an issue. I call it an issue because when I'm talking to someone and they start to get long-winded, I can see myself waning, and I'm kind of wondering, what do I look like to the person talking? I mean, because I feel like my eyes are crossing. I feel like I'm looking off away, and they're looking at me, trying to express how they feel or convey some type of instruction, and I am just somewhere else. And again, when someone gets too long-winded, I'm automatically starting to think about, what's my next move? What am I going to have for dinner or lunch? What am I going to do this weekend? And
Mhm.
it just leaves me kind of like What am I looking like? What am I doing? Let's hurry up and land this plane so I can
Yeah,
go ahead and respond.
yeah.
So I've noticed that a lot of times in the workplace, an employee start explaining the situation, and before they're halfway through, the manager jumps in with an answer.
Mm. So I think that's more common than you think. The interruption usually comes from good intentions, trying to help, but it can also unintentionally communicate, I already know what you're going to say. So instead, I like to encourage leaders to become more curious. Sometimes ask another question, what happened next? Or what have you tried already? Or what concerns you the most? You often learn information that you would have completely missed by slowing down. But also, people communicate differently. Some people are very direct. Sounds like you're very direct. Other people tell the story before they get to the point. So it's really challenging for leaders to, one, get to know their employees so they understand their communication language. But rather than cutting them off, I think leaders can gently guide the conversation by saying things like, so if I'm hearing you correctly, or it sounds like the main issue is, that's your way of steering them back to the conversation so you can make the best use of both of your time. It also helps to organize the conversation without making the person feel dismissed.
Right, right. For me, it's really about being present in the conversation. And like I said, I tend to check out if the person's too long-winded or taking a long way to get directly to the point.
You just got to help them land their plane in the most respectful way possible.
Well, I guess it's at this point, I think that naturally brings up empathy because I think
Mhm.
sometimes people confuse empathy with agreeing with someone.
Yep, I think that's exactly right. Empathy doesn't mean you agree with somebody's conclusions. It means that you're acknowledging their experience or validating their feelings or experiences. And there's a huge difference between saying, I understand why you feel frustrated, and saying, you're right. One is validating emotion, the other validates the conclusion. So leaders can do the first without necessarily doing the second. And that's something I also learned in my formal mediation training is you never want someone to feel like their feelings or what they experience was not valid. But you
Right.
don't want to co-sign to the conclusions that they're drawing before they even have the full interpretation of the situation. It's a little tricky.
Yeah, tricky. I agree, and I imagine that's especially important for leaders to have that skill set.
It is because leadership isn't just about making decisions. You're also influencing people, whether you want to or not, because people are much more willing to trust a leader who makes them feel like they're understood. And research consistently shows that employees who feel understood are more engaged, they are more innovative, and they're more likely to stay in the company. So you'll have less turnover.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Um, I don't want to say that I dismiss their feelings, but that's something that I don't want to do. And I feel like as a leader, that is something that I should be conscious of when I'm responding or talking to an employee.
Absolutely. You never want them to feel like what they're trying to express to you is not important. But there are people who like to tell those stories. So just find a gentle way to help them land their plane, send them the training. That's something that's been really effective. Effective communication will teach people to be as concise as possible because as the manager, you don't have time for storytelling. You're on to the next
Mm.
employee and the next project. And if you're a manager who's also in the weeds of doing the work, you definitely don't have the time.
So, how important is it to address the person and the problem while taking into consideration their psychological safety?
Psychological safety is my language. I can talk about psychological safety all day. It's foundational because psychological safety is the shared belief that people can speak up, they can ask questions, they can disagree respectfully, and also admit their mistakes without the fear of negative consequences like humiliation or punishment or retaliation. If people don't feel psychologically safe, then communication becomes performative to them, because you're telling me to communicate with you, to give me your ideas, tell me if you disagree with something. But when I do that, I face those negative consequences. So when that happens, employees start to filter everything they say. They become quiet, they stop sharing ideas, and eventually your company will lose valuable information because employees decide it's simply safer to not speak.
Right. And I know psychological safety is your thing. So for those who may not be familiar with that term, can you
Mm.
go and dig a little deeper into what does psychological safety actually mean in the workplace, of course?
A simple way to think about it is psychological safety doesn't mean that people are comfortable all the time. It means that you feel safe enough to be uncomfortable, safe enough to disagree with something that you think is wrong, you believe is wrong based on your expertise, which is why the company hired you. You also feel safe enough to ask questions, because the best inventions have come from people asking questions and people disagreeing, people changing direction based on that input. And you need to be safe enough to admit that you don't know something. That's where all
Mm,
the learning and innovation happens.
I agree. I agree. Now, there's another piece of communication that people don't always consider, and that's everything we're saying without actually speaking. You know, that nonverbal communication. Like I explained, what am I showing the person when
Yeah.
they're talking to me and I'm feeling long-winded? What nonverbal communication am I
Mhm.
communicating to them?
I've seen leaders roll their eyes when people are talking because it's the person that talks a lot. And it just makes me cringe, because I'm like, if you had any idea how you look to everyone else in this room. Research
Right.
tells us that people often pay more attention to how we communicate than the actual words themselves. Eye contact, facial expressions, our tone, our body posture, our response time. These all communicate something to the other party. And as leaders, we should constantly ask ourselves, what message am I sending before I even open my mouth?
Mm, mm. So sometimes when I have employees talking to me and I'm engrossed into doing what I'm doing, um, usually I'm finishing up an email or someone is chatting me on Teams. And as soon as a person walks into my office, they immediately start talking and I'm still typing. And I may look over at them while I'm still while I'm still typing and asking them, how can I help you? What is it? So
Mhm.
I kind of find myself doing that.
Mm,
So we've all had that conversation where someone saying they're listening, but they're answering emails while you're talking.
yes. Attention communicates value. When someone feels like you're distracted, they're interpreting it often as, what I'm saying is not important. So when they come into your office, even though they don't really ask if you have the time, if there's a way you can pause or leave that email that you're sending in draft. If you can't do that, because let's say you're sending this urgent email to someone high up and you have to send it right now, just say, oh, come on in, but give me 1 second. Finish what you're doing and then turn your attention back to them, because being fully present for even 5 focused minutes is usually
Mhm.
more impactful than 20 distracted minutes.
Understood, understood. So if you had to leave our listeners with one takeaway from this first segment, what would it be?
Communication starts with listening. People don't just remember what you said, they remember how you made them feel while you were saying it.
Wonderful, wonderful. When we come back, we're going to talk about the framework of effective communication, how clarity, consistency, and meaningful full feedback can eliminate confusion before it ever starts. So in this segment, we're going to talk about the framework, clarity, consistency, and feedback. We spent the first part of our conversation talking about listening and empathy, which really are the foundation of effective communication. But once you've listened and you understand someone's perspective, the next question becomes, how do I communicate my message clearly? Do you
Mm.
feel that leaders struggle in this area, Dr. Brett?
Absolutely. One of the biggest leadership mistakes is assuming clarity because something makes sense in your own mind. What may feel obvious to us may be completely new to someone else, just like me talking about psychological safety all day long when someone may not have ever heard the concept. Good leaders don't simply give instructions, they verify understanding. And one question I love is, just so we're on the same page, could you walk me through how you plan to approach this? Simple, and it uncovers misunderstandings before they become problems.
One thing I've learned over the years is that being direct doesn't mean being disrespectful, but it does require a bit of tact. There's still a thin line between assertiveness and just being rude. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that being direct is actually respectful. I have a great relationship with my manager at work. So we're the same. We like direct. Like I don't need like the sandwich of communication and feedback where you tell me some flowers and loveliness about something I did and then tell me what I did wrong. We have a shared language. Tell me what I messed up, what I made a mistake on, let me correct it. You can tell me all the pleasant stuff later. I think that's respectful. It's not a waste of anyone's time. What becomes disrespectful is when we're direct without considering the person's dignity. And you can be clear and kind at the same time. Those aren't opposites.
One thing that stands out to me, like when we have our personal discussions about work, is separating facts from stories. Facts are indisputable, of course, but while stories are left up to personal interpretation. What are your
One
thoughts?
frame, I love this. One framework I teach and I have developed is separating observable facts from our interpretations. And I'll give you an example. Instead of saying, you've been ignoring my emails, you can say, I sent emails Monday and Wednesday and haven't received a response yet. Those are observable facts, not assumptions. So now you've opened the door to understanding instead of triggering defensiveness, which is what we often do sometimes as leaders. Maybe they were out sick. Maybe the emails went spam. Maybe priorities shifted. So
Mm,
leading with the actual data instead of assumptions creates much healthier conversations.
mm. So instead of leading with an assumption, um, leading with something you already know, I'm trying to put that into my own perspective as I think about the things that I do at work.
Mhm.
Um, Another area of communication, especially in the workplace, is consistency. Employees need consistency because I feel like it builds trust. If expectations change every week, or if one employee is held to a different standard than another, I think that people begin to lose confidence in their leadership. What do you feel are some things that managers can do to create consistency with their employees?
I 1000% agree with you. Consistency builds trust because people know what to expect. That includes consistent expectations, consistent accountability, consistent standards, consistent follow through, and even consistent emotional responses. If one employee sees you reacting to another employee in a certain way, but they know that you react differently to them, they might start saying, oh, that's their favorite. And they will start having issues with that. And you'll probably start to see some performance or behavioral issues behind that. Employees shouldn't have to wonder which version of their manager they're going to get today.
Totally agree. Totally agree. When I first started my position as a manager, one-on-one meetings were something that I thought were important, just to ensure that we were all on track with the
Mhm.
current workload, projects, and administrative requirements. So I currently have a team I call a team of workhorses because they are consistently on their game all day long. And this is just me. I kind of feel like I would be distracting them from their day to day if I want to bring everyone in for a 15 to 30-minute meeting just to discuss how things are going, right? So what I do normally, once or twice a day for sure, is that first thing in the morning I'll come in, I'll get myself set up for the day, and then I'll go around to everyone's desk and just see how they're doing, what they're working on, make sure they don't have any issues, or if there's anything they need to communicate to me about. And when I do that, and I do that twice a day for sure, once in the morning and again in the evening, once things are a little settled down, I just want to see what's on everyone's plate, how they're doing throughout the day, and if there's any issues they need to bring up to me that they may need assistance with. And when I do that, I don't feel like I need to have a meeting with them, because I feel like I'm communicating and trying to get feedback from them throughout the day. So I personally don't feel like a meeting is really necessary. So do you feel that having those one-on-one meetings is something that leaders should definitely make a point to implement or maintain?
I love one-on-one meetings. Um, I don't necessarily love them because they're status updates, but they're relationship builders. They're opportunities to remove barriers or obstacles to doing the job, discuss development, answer questions, and build trust before some issues become crises. But they're also an opportunity to have more personal conversations. Maybe I love that you do the check-ins in the morning and afternoon. Those are really important. But the one-on-ones, I think people tend to get a little more in depth with challenges they're having, or even personal issues that might affect their time off. And I think the best one-on-ones aren't just about work, they're about people. So when I was a leader several years ago, I had a team of 4, and they were all different. They worked different, they communicated different. I had to take a different approach with each of them. But once I learned this about them, it was simple. I asked them all, do you want weekly one-on-ones? They could be 15 minutes, they can be 30 minutes. 3 of them said no, 1 of them said yes. So I implemented the one-on-ones with the 1. And then at our team meetings, which we had bi-weekly, I would just go ahead and say, hey, if you ever want a one-on-one, I would just remind them that I'm here, and it's available if they want it. So I didn't mandate it because, like you
Mhm.
said, people are busy. We already have too many meetings on our calendars, but there are some people who just almost need that
Mhm.
additional connection.
True, true. I totally agree. That leads perfectly into feedback, because I think many people hear the word feedback and immediately assume it's something negative. In healthy organizations, feedback is a must, and it shouldn't only happen when someone makes a mistake. Can you identify or provide an example of what good feedback looks like?
Good feedback is specific, it's timely, it's balanced, and it's actionable. So instead of saying good job, you could say the way you summarized that meeting helped everybody leave with clarity. That is feedback that somebody can repeat. And instead of saying you need to communicate better, say, I noticed the client wasn't copied on yesterday's update. Let's build a checklist so that doesn't happen again. You're telling them what they did wrong. If it's that kind of descriptive feedback, you're telling them what they did wrong. You're also telling them what they can do to make things better. It's timely because this just happened yesterday. It's specific and it's actionable.
One thing I do know from my own experience, that employees are much more receptive to constructive criticism. Um, I often, well, they're receptive when they know that their manager also notices the things that they're doing right. And I should say it like that. As a leader,
Mhm.
I'm a firm believer in positive feedback, whether that feedback is verbal or in the form of awards or promotions.
One thing I like to tell leaders is that I agree with you. Recognition isn't about making people feel good about what they did, the work they did, finishing that project ahead of schedule. It's about reinforcing behaviors that you want repeated. So leaders need to stop looking at recognition like, oh, this person needs so much validation, and look at it like, if I give them recognition, they'll do the same thing for the next project. They'll do an even better job because people tend to repeat what is getting noticed.
I totally agree. I totally agree. And I feel like when I'm doing things like that, when I'm giving them positive feedback, and even though I may not always say it, I do, show them that I appreciate their work. I see that the work that they're doing, the quality of work that they're doing, by putting them in for awards and giving them promotions. And I feel like they will work harder for me when I'm doing things like that.
Absolutely. It means a lot. And even not even just leadership, but even getting awards like my company, you can give an award to a peer and you give a description of why you're
Mm.
giving the award. And you wake up on a Monday morning, you log on to work and you have this award sitting in your inbox. It just makes you feel really good because your leader sees that award. And then sometimes your leader will forward that to 10 other leaders. And it's just a really good feeling.
Mm, totally agree. So right now we're going to go into segment 3, which is delivery, choosing the right channels and styles. So we talked about listening, empathy, clarity, and feedback. Now let's talk about something that often gets overlooked, how we actually deliver the message. I think a lot of us assume that if we have something important to say, the method doesn't really matter, but it absolutely does. Just how important is delivery when communicating with employees?
Delivery matters tremendously. And sometimes the issue isn't what we said, it's where we said it, when we said it, or how we said it. A difficult conversation deserves privacy. A celebration deserves a public audience. I have seen people be scolded during team meetings in a
Mm,
conference room with 15 people in there. That's never effective for anyone. If you need to give a quick clarification, you might be able to do that over Skype or Teams. The medium should match the message.
I totally agree. I totally agree. So when we look at communication styles such as passive aggressive, and assertive, do you feel like there is one style that fits all, or one that would seem the most effective in the workplace?
Yes, yes, yes. Assertiveness is almost always the healthiest communication style, in my opinion.
Mm,
Passive communication it leaves a lot unspoken. And people tend to fill in those gaps with assumptions. Aggressive communication will damage a relationship because that is all about control. I think passive aggressive communication just creates confusion because there's no clarity. It's all vague. But assertive communication says, I respect you and I also respect myself. And that's where the healthy workplaces thrive.
mm. So a lot of the time, the best way, like for me to communicate, is via email. Because say I get something from an employee or something from my manager, and depending on what's going on, I'm immediately irritated by the question, and I'm typing. I'm not really thinking much. I'm just typing because I'm irritated with the question that you asked me, and I feel like I'm explaining myself over and over again. And the best way for me to communicate via email. That gives me time to put my thoughts down and go over them a couple of times before actually hitting the send button.
I think that email is a wonderful tool for documentation, or if you need clarity, you want to keep a record of something, or if you're sharing information, but it's terrible for emotion. If something could easily be misunderstood, or it could potentially create conflict, or it involves anybody's feelings, I'd rather pick up the phone or meet face to face, because one sentence spoken with warmth can prevent 10 emails trying to explain tone because you're going back and forth, back and forth. That's not what I meant. Well, yeah.
I understand. I understand. Dr. Bradden, this has been a fantastic conversation. We've covered a lot, from active listening and empathy to clarity, consistency, feedback, communication styles, and even choosing the right communication channel. If there's one thing I've actually taken away from today's discussion, is that effective communication isn't a talent you're born with. It's a
Mm.
skill that everyone can develop with practice and intention.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on here. I really hope that listeners walk away remembering that effective communication isn't about having the perfect words. None of us are perfect. We're all human. It's about creating that shared understanding. When people feel like they're heard and they're respected and they're psychologically safe, then you're going to have improvements in your communication with that person. And if it's a team, all the better. I think when communication improves, your relationships also improve. You know what else improves? Your leadership. And the organization all together becomes healthier, a healthier place for all employees to work. And every conversation is an opportunity to build trust or unintentionally damage that trust. But the good news is communication, like you said, is a skill. And like any skill, it can be learned, it can be practiced, and it can be strengthened over time.
Totally agree. I appreciate this conversation with you, Dr. Bratton, and I look forward to chiming in and listening in on some of your other podcasts and your TikTok your TikTok videos. You know, I'm a fan of TikTok and YouTube. So I'll be looking for more of your videos and streams there. This will be the end of our podcast. I enjoyed the conversation. You have a wonderful day, Dr. Bradden.
Thank you. You do the same.